Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our ICTM webinar. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. This is always the riveting part of the webinars when I try to figure out how to work this platform. There we go. All right, so thank you for joining us for, this is actually going to be our last webinar of the school year. We will pick up again in the fall, but this one is about using Desmos Card Sorts, and we are very lucky to have Adam here, who is a Desmos fellow. So not only does he know about Desmos, he's been officially trained in Desmos, so we have an expert.
Annie was accepted into the new Desmos Fellowship, so congratulations to you, Annie.
Thank you. So Adam, he is a math methods instructor at the University of Illinois and teaches a variety of courses related to math education across K-12. In 2015, he was the recipient of a Campus Teaching Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching. Before teaching at the college level, he worked as a math teacher at Champaign Central High School for 10 years. And as I mentioned, Adam's also a member of the Desmos Fellowship and works with Desmos to provide professional development to schools and districts. If this is your first time joining us for a webinar, let me just give you a little kind of briefing on how this platform works. It might be a little different than other webinars you participated in. So there is a spot where you can type into the chat if you have any questions during the webinar. Those questions are not seen by other participants. They actually just get directly sent to me. I'll be moderating, and I will sort of curate the questions and ask them at appropriate times during the webinar. And I think Adam said he'll save a little bit of time at the end for some additional questions as well. Tomorrow you'll get a follow-up email that will have a link to the recording. And also, if you are attending live, you can in that follow-up email, there'll be a link to a Google form. You can fill that out, and evidence of PD completion, you get 1 hour of PD credit, will get emailed to you automatically. Obviously, if you're watching this as a recording, you're not watching live, then you can't do that PD credit. But as always, these webinars are brought to you by the Illinois Council of Teachers Mathematics, and it's members that bring them to you. So if you are not a member yet, we would like you to go to ictm.org and consider membership. It's only $35 a year. It's quite a bargain for all of the community and professional development that you get. And keeping in mind our conference in October, something to save the date for. So I think that's all my commercials and things I need to say. So I'm going to go ahead and mess around with this platform again and go ahead and change presenters so that you can see Adam's screen, and he is going to teach us all about Desmos Card Sorts.
Okay. All right, thanks, Annie, very much.
Yep.
Let me go ahead and see if I can switch over here for a second. All right. Is my webcam turned off, Annie?
I still see you.
Okay.
Oh, wait, did you show your shirt before you go off?
Oh, I think it just went off.
Oh, Desmos t-shirt twins. Very exciting.
Right. That's right. So Annie, we have our Desmos t-shirt twins, and there's more varieties too. There actually is a Desmos store. I believe it's desmos.store.com, where you can go and get your swag and your Desmos gear. So there's even socks. I think for Christmas, my children got me socks from the Desmos website. Because it's true, when it comes to Christmas time, and my kids say, what do you want? I say, go to that Desmos store and pick out something green. So thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this for now and make this full screen. But I'm excited to just share with you today a few things here about Desmos Card Sort. Just getting my screen set up here. Oh. One sec, Annie, sorry. Okay. That looks like it works. Okay. All right. Well, today, my goal today with you is to kind of talk about having all sorts of fun with Desmos Card Sort. And that'll be our topic here as we move forward. I think many of us are just familiar with card sorts in classroom. It's not a new activity or new routine, but been around for a long time. But one that continues on because it just has a lot of potential for learning and engagements and interaction around topics. In this case, we'll focus on math, but definitely not a math-only learning activity to go through. When we think about card sorts, there are just many different things that are helpful, and we're going to dive into that today. So here's kind of the general plan for this webinar. Just want to start and give a nod again to why card sorts are a beneficial thing to think about as math educators. And then I want us, as part of the webinar here, just to try a Desmos card sorts a little bit to get a taste of one on your end, and for me to model some of the teacher dashboard side on my end. And then I'd like to basically take a look at some existing Desmos card sorts to see some different ways teachers have decided to implement it in their classrooms, to use the existing Desmos tools to put some variations on it for different purposes. I think by seeing that, you kind of get a feel for what's possible, get your imagination going. And while we're doing that, we'll be discussing some ideas for classroom implementation. And then want to talk about just, again, making your own sorting activities. If you're inclined to think about designing one for your own classroom, students' own purposes, it's very accessible. So I want to make sure that you see how to do that and a few tips along the way as well. So that's the plan. So let's start with the idea again of why card sort activities in math. Well, just to give a quick nod here, I think a big thing with these is that whether it's technology or not, the activity is driven by student mathematical thinking. I mean, the teacher is leaving the front of the room. Students are typically in pairs or groups having to think about similarities and differences, patterns, identifying categories, things that are alike, and being able to verbalize that. So in doing that, it can be a really fruitful way to have meaningful mathematical conversation between students. You know, in thinking of our math practices, I mean, definitely when we think about creating an argument as to why you think certain things go together as opposed to other cards or other topics, and being able to critique arguments of others is a real sweet spot with this type of activity. Card sorts lend themselves very well to have students think about connections between representations of all kinds, whether it's fractions or functions. We can look at different representations and have students match things that are equivalent or have things in common or similar. And in doing that, I mean, definitely reinforces a lot of math vocabulary. We just know that for students to be able to retain and be able to fully, you know, use that language precisely, they need practice. And so card sorts, again, can be a great way to have students practice that vocabulary, use it for a purpose, you know, get reinforced with hearing others and having some class discussion around it. And lastly, just again, that card sorts can be a great formative assessment that are very flexible because we could think about card sorts sometimes being as a way to kick off a unit, to think about what students already know, to activate prior knowledge, to see what they know. It can be something that's used to reinforce ideas that are already being you know, visited, or to kind of assess at the end of a learning cycle. Definitely something that can be used kind of, yeah, in the beginning, middle, or end of learning cycles for different purposes, which makes it, again, very flexible and a nice tool. So with that, we know that these have been around for a while, and while they're often loved activities, there are struggles as well. I mean, as a teacher myself who use many different card sorts, I mean, just the cutting and the keeping and the bagging and trying to make sure that they're kept for next year's and the sets are complete can be an issue. So enter Desmos. And if you're here today, I'm assuming you probably have a little background in Desmos, but if not, that's okay. A 30-second synopsis again is Desmos is a free online you know, math tool for teachers that at its heart started as a graphing calculator, but now has an entire site called teacher.desmos.com, which has many activities for teachers to use with students, and teachers can create their own activities. And within teacher.desmos.com and within the activity builder, one of the things is a card sort. And so we're going to look today about creating card sorts with Desmos, and this is an example of one here, just looking at being able to sort each scenario by its graph, equation, and function type. We're just going to explore a little bit to see what Desmos brings to the table with the card sorts. With that said, right from the beginning, I'll say that, like with any technology, it doesn't, you know, you may solve some issues by going to technology and may lose some benefits of paper as well. So I'm not going to make the argument that this is necessarily 100% always better than paper, but we'll talk about some advantages as we move forward here. So what I want to do is I have several things to share and show you today, but I think it's best to start by doing. And so I want to model that even in this webinar. And so what I'm going to do is basically have you as participants be able to do and experience a short card sort activity. And then I'll be able to also show my teacher side as the dashboard. And then we'll dive in and look at some deeper things as well. So I'm going to do, I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to shrink this down. 1 second. So I'm going to bring this down and bring this up. Okay. So on my screen here, I am now at teacher.desmos.com. And this is where Desmos houses all of its free activities and tools for teachers. In the top right, if you're new to Desmos, what you need to do is you would need to, not now, but as a teacher, you need to create a free account and just be able to log in. And so I'm already logged in as myself here. And I'm going to find an activity here that I have planned ahead. And this one we're going to do today is called Fractions, Estimating Sums and Differences. And again, if I'm a teacher using Desmos activities here, what I might do again is, just to model this, is there is a preview button in blue here on the right side of my screen. When I click that preview button, basically it previews what we're about to do. And so as a teacher, I can take a look and see what this is. And just to preview it, today we're going to be looking at different types of fraction expressions and trying to figure out which ones are closest to 0, closest to half, and closest to 1. So once we get you there, you'll be able to move cards around. If you're new to this, just a quick demonstration. If you take a card and drag it on top of another card, they will link together. You'll see that it highlights blue or a color, and then you can link them together there. And if you want to separate them, we can just drag it apart and have that flexibility to move it around. Other things to know is on your screen, if we click a card, it will enlarge, which often is helpful, because one thing with paper going to technology is we have a limited screen size, and that is one issue that does come up sometimes. So we can go ahead and click on a card to enlarge it, and the X in the corner to bring it back down. And if we needed to, once we get a pile of cards, like in this pile of 3 on the left, we can go ahead and collapse it and open it as well, just to save space at times. Another thing I'll say is that I'm in Chrome right now, but under the View tab of Chrome at the top, there's zoom in and zoom out, which again, I'll say as a teacher, I've learned this can be helpful for me as I'm demonstrating things or working with certain activities. Sometimes it's good to zoom in or zoom out of your screen if you need more room or less room as you go. This slide at the top though, it says this is screen 1 of 5 in this activity. And so I just want to point out that this activity isn't only the card sort. It has some extra slides that you'll have a chance to look at, which are an option we have as well. Okay, so, oh, what happened to my screen? There we go. Okay, so with that said, I'm going to model now as a teacher. Again, what I would do is the top button, the green Create Class Code, is where I would go to create a code for my unique class. And today, you are all in my unique class. And when I hit that, this is the 4th time I've done this. And so it's given a new code that we're going to type in. And here's how this is going to work. If you're new to this, I'm going to hit this view dashboard here, and it's bringing up a screen. And here's what I want you to do now. One is do not close out your current tab in whatever browser you're using, because you'll lose the webinar for now. But if you can open up a new tab in your browser or a new window, and as a student, you would go to student.desmos.com and type in this code, 2TP5CK. I don't believe there needs to be a space in the middle. It looks like there is in this one, but it's not necessary. And good, I see several of you are already logging in. And so that's great. Again, keep the webinar tab open, and again, open a new tab or new window. Find yourselves to student.desmos.com. And I'll leave up this code again, but 2TP5CK. Now, when you go in, if you're new to Desmos, again, just a few things. You may have noticed it asked you, like, do you want to sign in with Google, or do you want to sign in with Desmos, or just continue without signing in? If you're new to Desmos, it's totally fine to continue without signing in. If you're new, students can definitely do that. They can go in and type in their name and continue on. The other options for being able to sign in with Google or the Desmos account means that your students can actually kind of come back to the activities. If you're doing projects or activities that take more than one day, if you actually have them sign in, then they can revisit and restart and continue activities they did previously. But for now, signing in is fine. So at this point, I see many of you are logged in here and are engaging with the card sort. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes to do that. Looks like 27 people are logged in here. Thanks. So Annie has the code in the chat, so I'm going to take down the code on my screen. Now, I know you can't do two things at once, so I'm going to keep talking just because it is a webinar. For those who are maybe watching at home, I'll show some things here as well. On the top of my screen, this is called the teacher dashboard, and this is part of the Desmos activity experience for teachers, is that it's a great way to be able to monitor student progress and see what they are doing. Now, right now, I'm going to go ahead and anonymize names in case you didn't want your real name there. On the top left, again, Desmos has 3 very great classroom conversation tools, and one of them is anonymize. So it's anonymized everyone's names. They're all now famous mathematicians, which is always fun. And on your screen, actually in the top right, it says which mathematician you are in the top right, I can see here. But a nice thing is when I click on my dashboard on any one screen, it actually pulls up a student's screen to see where they were at that moment. So right now, I'm taking a look at Grace Hopper and can see where they're at in their card sorting, and Felix Hausdorff as well, and kind of see what's happening on different screens here from my side. All right, but good on your side. See people continuing on a bit here, which is good. 38 students are now logged in, so I can see on my dashboard here, which is great. And once everyone has had a few minutes, I'm going to have you come back and we'll look at some dashboard things together. But with Desmos Activity, the nice thing is with a dashboard like this, you have many options, obviously, as a teacher. One is obviously you don't have to have it up at all as a teacher. You can have the students engaging with the activity and not worry about this at the moment. But also we can pull it up and have it open on our computer so that we can monitor. If we have a mobile tablet or an iPad or something, we can walk around the room and actually be able to see progress as students are working. Because there's many features here we'll look at in a few minutes. Yeah, so I'm gonna click again and take a look at, let's take a look at Charlotte Scott here. So good, Charlotte's making some progress here that we see. Now on the dashboard, you may notice that there are some dots and some checks. A check means that the student has successfully completed the sort. So as a teacher, I know that it's successfully completed. If it's a dot, it means that they've done something, but they're not all the way there yet. There's something to be looked at again or interpreted, or they're making progress along the way. So that's what the dot means on my dashboard. And yeah, so we have that as well. Well, great. Going to give everyone a couple more minutes just to look at it. And if you are watching from, sorry, my full screen just, there we go. If you're watching from a recording, just to point out while they're doing that, in the top right, there are 3 buttons, Summary, Teacher, and Student on my dashboard. Nice thing is, just to highlight that, when I click the Student button, basically, this is the activity as a student would do it. So as a teacher, if I want to model something for the class or take a look at it, this allows us to basically discuss with the class certain screens and have kind of a blank canvas to do so. I also have a teacher screen, which allows me to see kind of a summary of each page. And I think at this point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and pause the class here and bring everyone back in for a second. All right. So on the top left, again, I have my Desmos tools. I'm going to hit the pause button. And what this did is this went ahead and paused everybody where they're at the moment. So students are unable to work, which is a great way to bring the class together for some discussion or directions. So if you could go back to the tab that has our webinar on it, that would be great. You can come back here and let's take a little bit of what I see on my end and be able to talk about kind of what we're experiencing here. So again, on the dashboard, a few things to point out. Number one, I can see that there are 20 people on slide 1, 5 on slide 2, 7 on 3, 2 on 4, and 1 on 5. And down below, we can see again kind of a spread of how that works again. And what we see again here, just a highlight, is that anything with a check are students that have successfully completed the card sorts. If it's an X, it means they moved on, but there's at least one error. And a dot just means that there are some things that they're still working on it, or need some human interpretation along the way. But here are some neat things to realize now. So again, on the top right of my dashboard, we see summary, teacher, and student. As I said before, but you can see it now, the student button allows us to pull up the student activity and be able to go from screen to screen. And if we want to discuss certain things from a blank slate, we're able to. The teacher one in the middle is very helpful, and I want to bring this up for a second. So this here shows every student, and it shows their progress on the sort. And obviously, we see green and red, and the green stacks are ones that have been successfully placed in the right orders. And the red ones means there's at least one error in that stack. And so this here becomes a great way to get a quick picture of the class and to see where we're at and making progress. A common question with the card sorts is, will the activity tell the students when they're right or not? And at this point in the Desmos, no, there's not an option to have the students automatically be told if they're right or not. And that is a philosophical decision by Desmos to continue to have their tool be used for rich discussion and interaction, more than just giving right answers. But definitely there are ways still to have that discussion, think about what's right. For example, some teachers have used this screen here to actually put in front of their room and be able to put up and display it while the anonymous is on, so that students and groups can be able to see where they're at and be able to look at their colors and be able to try and get it right. And so that can be used that way as well. Now with each of these, everything's interactive. If I take one of these, for example, like Annie Easily, and just click on Annie, it pulls up Annie's screen, and we can take a look at what Annie has right here. And what's nice here, some features we have, is we can see here where she's at. But on the bottom left, there is an answer key thing. And on the bottom left, if I click on one of these 3 down here, it actually will display on the screen. Right now, it shows the middle column is green. If I click the middle one, it kind of shows all the ones highlighted in green are the ones that should be together. And so, for example, you can see the top card on the left stack is not in the right place. And it's a way to quickly be able to see where the cards are and where they might go. As a teacher, again, if I have students working on it and was walking around and had this on a nice iPad or mobile tablet, it's a great tool to be able to quickly see where it's at, to be able to encourage students to keep thinking about a certain card or a certain column along the way. Yeah, and so here again, we just see the Desmos dashboard here and can see what's happening. The other thing that's neat is in the teacher dashboard, responses are helpful, but if the goal is to create conversations, we also want to think about maybe some of things that our students are struggling with. And when I click the overview tab here under the teacher button, we see, for example, a row that says most common incorrect cards. So right now, for 7/9 minus 2/9 is one that many people have gotten wrong for one reason or another. So it could be a great one for us to discuss and talk about to see what students think it is closer to and why. And there's a show more button as well to kind of show the top couple. And so these are all cards that would be great for us to have a targeted discussion around these cards. And so Desmos is helping us as teachers know, here are some high leverage cards to talk about along the way. Yeah, and so this is just an overview of the dashboard again, a lot of neat things here to think about. And now that you've tasted this, we're gonna look at some other examples and then be able then to talk about what you've seen here with this. So I'm gonna shrink this down again and open this back up. Okay, and, oh, 1 second. Lost my mouse for a second, where'd it go? All right, 1 second. There we go. All right, and let me go ahead and pull this full screen. There we go. So a little nod to that one. That one was originally done by Jennifer Vadnais, who is a wonderful Desmos creator, and it was edited later a little bit by me, but she did most of the work on that one. But let's do this. Now that you've seen kind of the dashboard and tried a little bit of one, let's talk a little of some other examples and pedagogy and some things to think about with the card sorts as we move forward here. So we're going to take a look at some examples. Each one may offer something a little different and unique, and we'll just talk about it as we go. And each one has the creator up top, just so they get credit for who may have created these in the beginning. So some people have used Desmos to take existing card sorts they used and be able to put it again on the platform. So that's the same thing they were doing before, but now it's something that once they make it digital, it's done once, and students can have access to the cards without worrying about losing them or having them, and you know, can use it from year to year. So for example, there are some great card sorts on the map.mathshell.org site. This one was about interpreting time and distance graphs, where students have to match a situation to a graph. And one like this, Karl has made this so that he basically even tells them there's one card that doesn't have a match. That sometimes to, again, encourage students to have to think hard. That's one strategy, again, to have a card or two that may not fit and to have to realize that along the way. Here's another example of a card sort in Desmos made by Cathy Yenca. And she is using some ideas around activities around always, sometimes, or never, which can work with a lot of different math topics at a lot of different grades. In this case, she chose real numbers here. And again, in this one, students are going to be thinking about, oh, with these statements, are they always true, sometimes true, and having to have a conversation. But here's an important thing. When I had you just do it just a few minutes ago, obviously all of you were alone on your computers. And since the goal of card sorts is usually a lot of conversation around a topic, I would not suggest, usually implementing it that way in your class. Using two students to a computer and having them do this together is where that conversation is going to happen. Because if I'm doing it alone and I think pi is a rational number, and I think sometimes, well, I put it there and I don't really have anyone to challenge me on that or to help me think what pi really is or what rational number means. And so definitely with card sorts, to encourage conversation, a good idea to think about two kids on one device working together. Possibly you could set expectations of taking turns, have one person drag a card, another person drag a card, and you just encourage both to take on the role there. Now in Cathy's card sort, I want to make a point too that some card sorts in Desmos are a one-screen activity. For example, on the last one we looked at from Karl, this could be a one-screen activity, and students are going to do this, and then after the end, we can talk about it as a class and see what cards were the most challenging. But sometimes the card sort can be part of a larger activity. And here at the bottom of the screen, we see some things that Cathy did in hers. For example, after this, they had another screen that asked students to agree or disagree with a student claim, where they look at a claim and have to type in their explanation for agreeing or disagreeing. On the right, we see Cathy put in a screen that had students create their own card. What would be a card that would be sometimes true? And the students have to make a statement that they believe would be sometimes true using some of those vocabulary words there, which is great. And her activity, I really like it. In the next slide, she actually has them state and give an example of something that would be true, sometimes and not, and give a couple examples. There's so many examples out there. This was by Matt Barker. It's a sequences card sort. This is an example, again, of multiple representations. We see that Matt was creating or adapting an activity here that had a kind of visual growing patterns matched with different types of sequences and formulas to be able to generate those. And here he tells them, separate into 5 different groups that they're allowed to do. Just to see some examples here, this is another card sort example by Bob Lochel. He's very big in statistics, since he has one here with describing distributions. And again, what Bob did with the Desmos tool is he actually started screen 1, which is the top part where it says high temperature data. And it says this dot plot shows the high temperature readings for a major city over 150 days. In the next screen, separate the statements into agree and disagree piles. Remember, you can arrow back to this screen anytime you want. Well, this is really great. So here Bob has an idea to just put a twist on the card sort. So he gave him a representation, in this case a statistical one, and then on the card sorts we see all these different statements that they need to drag and figure out which ones do they agree with, which ones they disagree with, and of course they're going to have to justify it along the way. with their partners, and then maybe some whole class discussion at the end about what was correct and why. But a neat way to use the card sort. Another interesting way to use card sort that people have discovered is that even with regular card sorts, is there's not always a right answer. Card sorts don't have to be done so there's exactly one specific way to sort the cards. Often called an open sort, there's times where students can be given a set of cards and be asked to sort them into their own categories by similarities or differences they see. And it's a much more open-ended task, but one where, with this quadratics example from Heather Cohn, students might choose to sort things into a certain type of equation form, or maybe something about the direction of which the parabola is opening, up or down, or something about the y-intercept or a translation. And so students have an option to think about different ways to sort it and be able then to justify it. In her case, we see her screen. She had several more within her Desmos activity. On the bottom left, we see her ask the students to convince me, explain why you chose to sort the cards the way you did. And they can feel free to click back, but give a justification for what they and their partner did. And then in the red box here, we see their screen where Julie basically showed a sample sort and asked the kids to, Heather asked the kids to think about what Julie did and to be able to look at Julie's sort and think, what rule might Julie have used to sort the categories in these three things? And then down below, Heather has her students sort them in a different way themselves to think again. So again, an open sort can be a great way. I know in geometry it's used a lot with different shapes, especially to think about different properties, especially in the elementary and early middle school grades. But just open sorts can be a nice open-ended conversation tool. And the Desmos tools don't have to be only kind of that middle and high school material. There's so many things out there as well. Examples of teachers that are taking this down to many different grade levels. Here we see Jessica Brewer looking at representations of fractions, decimals, and percents, and having students think about how to match an area model with a fraction, with a decimal, with a percent. So here we have looking for 4 equivalent representations, and that's great. What a great thing for students to talk about and have to work together on, with a partner to go through. I was working with some teachers, and we were looking at the really young grades here, and we're just looking at examples of cones, cylinders, spheres, and cubes, and we were making this for some kindergarten, first grade students. And just, again, having them be able to sort some pictures and objects, getting used to some new language, and identifying some words and pictures. So it can be very visual as well. Annie, I took one. Annie's done a lot of work with Desmos in many fronts, and she also has done some things with elementary, and this is one that Annie did with clocks here. And Annie, I don't know if you want to jump on, and I know that you had talked about giving this a go. Was it first grade students, Annie, that you ended up using this one with?
Yes, this was a first grade group, and talk about making this really easy. I basically just stole these images from the curriculum that the teacher was using, so it's not like I had to create my own stuff. We just sort of, I think this is like Pearson and Vision was the curriculum, and so we just used screenshots of the activity and made it from that. So
yeah, awesome. So it's a great tip, and we'll look at that here in a little bit too. And so with yours, Annie, with even the young students, I mean, did they, technology-wise, how'd they do with working through the sorting and the screen and the dragging? And
yeah, they're amazing at it. I think whenever I've taught adults how to do it, they have a harder time with clicking them together, whereas that seems really intuitive, especially like for first graders. They were like, yeah, you need to put them on top of each other till they snap together, and that seemed really intuitive to first graders, whereas adults, we seem to have a harder time with that. But they did, yeah, it was super intuitive to them, and they knew exactly what to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Annie. Thought we'd just hear from you a bit there. Thanks. This was neat. So this was telling time. This was to the nearest hour, of course, it looks like. And then it's neat, Annie, it looks like you had several screens in yours afterwards. I put one down here where students used a drawing tool in Desmos to draw in a time, both on an analog clock and then a digital clock, to make that connection between those two representations as well. Really neat. And by the way, out there, if you have questions, if you type it in at any time, there'll be some time for some asking questions at the end, but during it, if you want to type in a question in the chat, feel free to do so, and Annie will let me know and can moderate it as needed here. But again, other examples here. This was also a very young student example, but just seeing, again, some different ideas of how people have been using it. What I like with this one is this was for younger students. In the red there was a screen where they had students think about, analyze whether this pairing was correct or not. But you know what? They didn't even have the students write anything here. It was something to think about with their partner and talk with their partner. And it was a nice reminder as well that it's really about the conversation. You know, it doesn't always have to be typed in everything, but just having a conversation around that objects can be really beneficial here. So as we think about examples here, I want to go back to that dashboard for a second. And this is a picture taken off of, again, Cathy Yenca's blog, who's done a lot of work with Desmos. So I thank her for sharing a lot of what she does. I want to share again, just as far as just thoughts of classroom implementation here. She was sharing, recently some different ways that she has used it. And again, as we said earlier, that on the dashboard, as far as students getting some feedback, when this screen is shared up on the dashboard, students can kind of match their mathematician name on their screen with the one here on the projector and be able to see, how they're doing along the way. And actually what she did something that was out of the box as well, is she actually had them complete an activity on paper first, looking to see if something was parallel or not to this, and then basically made a Desmos screen where they could come in and drag their answers into groups and be able to look at the screen and see if their piles were green or red. And what she said was just that it was interesting. Again, when students have those red piles, they don't know which card is wrong. They just know something is wrong in each pile. But just the conversations went to a whole new level as students realized, wait a minute, we're not, something's not right here, and we need to figure out what it is to get our piles green, to get that feedback again. Now, on a challenging front, as you can imagine, I mean, students could definitely try and just randomly move things back and forth and try and do that until things become green. And there's always issues like that to deal with. I've known some teachers that said that they put this up, but kind of either put their screen, they have a, I can't remember what the word is. Well, you can either just hide the screen and show it every few minutes so they can see where they're at, so it's not constantly dragging and dropping cards to see what happens, or a freeze frame. I've seen some teachers say they took a freeze frame every few minutes, and that way they could see their progress when they got there. But again, it's just thinking about those types of management issues are always good to hear what teachers might do. So let's stop for a second and think about a few big ideas here, just to think about some of the things we just saw and did. So one thing, again, I want to reemphasize what I said earlier is that definitely recommended, usually with these activities, and there's never an always, but definitely recommend as teachers to put two kids on a device so they can have that conversation and think about expectations for how they might take turns with the cards and going through. Also, another opportunity here is if you have pairs working on computers, that once they get done, you could always have them basically be able to pair up and compare screens and see how they did with each other, and sometimes be able to bring that discussion to a next level of you two finished and you two finished great. Once you go sit next to them, put your computers together and see if you agree and have a discussion around where you agree, and if it's different, see if you can come to a consensus between your groups. Another thing I want to put out there is the idea that just because we're on a computer doesn't mean you still can't expect math work on paper. Sometimes there are certain card sort activities or any Desmos activities where I definitely would recommend still sometimes having that piece of paper in front of them. It could be a little graphic organizer that has some space for some work, where we still like them to be able to work out some of the mathematics, to put down their ideas, to do some drawings, representations along the way. So it's not just dragging of cards, but also sometimes being able to still work through problems and think about it. For example, maybe you're looking at different equations, and you're trying to drag them to groups of which ones have an answer that equals less than 7 or more than 7 or equal to 7. Well, again, we might still have them be able to again, on paper with their partners, so be working on things and then be able to put their answers by dragging cards on the screen. Don't be afraid to use the paper and think about how to organize that work with them, and also to justify some of the decisions they're making. And going back to the idea of checking for correct matches, again, I want to just some more time about this, just because definitely, at Desmos, one of the biggest requests they do get is people do ask a lot for the card sorts to be able to tell students if they are right or not. And that conversation is going on in Desmos circles, and some things to think about. Like I said earlier, it's interesting, they have not made that available yet so that students could just see on their own screen, just based on some philosophy of wanting, again, to have their tool be used to encourage that conversation, to be able to have that pair and class conversation. So you as a teacher have control of that with your dashboard, and you control how that ends up working. So again, what you might do is at the end of an activity, when students are done, you might just have a whole class discussion as a class and have them think about as a class which ones go where. You could pull up the screen on your projector and be able to move them around as a class until you get consensus. You could just project, of course, the answer key up on the projector and have students match it that way. Other things we saw is basically the teacher can check that dashboard, walk around the room and give feedback. I mean, definitely some things that happen to students when they're done. They can raise their hand and you can give them a quick thumbs up or keep, not yet type answer as they go on. Definitely works. As we said, some teachers like to put the whole dashboard on the projector for the class to see their red and green cards as they're doing it, and then when they get all green, they're correct. I've also seen some teachers that printed out the screenshot of the answers and had a few in the room, and some students that got done first, they allowed them to kind of be the checkers, and they would walk around, and if other students didn't have it quite right, they would just tell them, nope, you still need to look at these three, there's at least one card off in all three columns, or just to allow a student to have that role as well. So lots of options to move forward with there. So in thinking about that, obviously one question is, where do I go find these, right? Where are they? What's out there? What can I use for my level in my class, in my grade? So some thoughts. So one, the website we started with, teacher.desmos.com, definitely has the ones that Desmos has put on their screen. And as you saw me do, there's a little search there. You can search for card sorts and several things come up. But do know that there's a small fraction of the card sorts that exist out there. Those are only the ones that Desmos has approved to be on their site in their main page. There are some other sites to go to. For example, this link here, bit.ly/Desmos Card Sort Bank. This is a collection. This is what the picture is on the screen in front of you, where some teachers have, I think there's maybe 50 or so card sorts here that, maybe not quite that many, but somewhere in that range of some sorts that teachers have been sharing that you can use for inspiration or just use for your purposes. You can also edit them as well, which we'll look at. Definitely just Googling is, as always, there's things enough out there on different teacher blogs and things that when you Google Desmos Card Sort in a math topic, often you'll find a hit to some things that you want to look at. And Twitter, the MTBOS, and part of the Twitter community, just searching some searches on Desmos and Card Sort. It's amazing some of the things that will come up on Twitter these days. So with that, so let me pause for a second here. What I'd like to do is, be able to have us think about making some card sorts on our own, but I want to pause for a second and for any questions here, if you have any at this point, before we kind of get into that side of the card sort. So feel free if you want to type in a question or raise your hand. I believe you have a hand raise button. You can feel free to raise your hand as well.
Yeah, there's a few questions if you
sure, Annie.
Pause for these.
Yeah.
Well, the one that came up that you answered was how to find these card sorts. So thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of people were just, because you shared so many good ones, so how you kind of came across all of those. Is there anything that you've tried to do it in a card sort that you've realized doesn't work?
Good question. Good question. Let's think about that. Well, one thing I know, if I get ambitious, a couple times I tried to put too many cards on one screen. And if you put, this is one of the downfalls of a computer screen, right? You have a limited size. So if you get ambitious, and you may have a card sort you love and it has 36 cards as part of it, and you want to make it digital, I would recommend usually not going over about 20 cards as the max as far as screen space. Of course, it depends on the size of your cards and what you're doing, but basically screens get too full when you start grouping things together. They kind of go off the screen. I mean, you can zoom out, but then things get really small. So definitely have to learn not to be too ambitious. Sometimes if you have a large sort activity that you liked, you can do it over multiple screens, to break it up into just get the cards sorted and be able to do it over multiple screens and have several touches at it, and just not all at once. So that's one recommendation that I'd pass on.
Great. The other question somebody had was, and maybe you're going to get into actually creating them, but they noticed that the font was larger on the fractions one that you did, and on some, it's like, is there a way to make how do you make numbers larger than just the text that you can do.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to talk about next. So we're going to get into that right now.
Okay, perfect. And so then the other question maybe you want to is planning pacing, like when to pause. I don't know if you're going to get into that at all, but
yeah,
how do you know when to do that?
Yeah, that's a good idea. So going back to that dashboard, again, we saw that, if I go back to the screen here, again, in the top left, we see those tools, anonymize, pacing, and pause. And again, this can be great. The pacing button in card sorts can be important sometimes. You know, if you have several screens, but you want your kids to focus just on that card sort and not be moving on to other screens until you've been able to check or give them feedback or have a class discussion, pacing can be a great tool. You just click the pacing button, and I can't show you right now, it's not pulled up. You click the pacing button and it tells you what screen you want to start at or end at, and you click that, you click the screen on the top there, you can see like number 1, and it will restrict kids to number 1. So if you want the class to all be at one slide at one time to kind of move everyone as closely through as you can and have a discussion before moving on, pacing can be a valuable tool to do that. The pause, I mean, just depends. The pause have done some different things. I mean, I also haven't always waited for, there's not time sometimes for every kid to finish every activity. There's been times where we paused it and pulled up, pulled up, a screen where it wasn't quite correct. So I pulled up someone's one that wasn't quite correct. And our goal as a class was then to try and fix it. That way we could have the class discussion around which cards we think are in the right place or not the right place, which would we move and why. And by pausing the class, we're able to kind of stop the students alone, but get back to the whole class discussion. And fixing, an incorrect sort can be a great tool to use with that as well, or to pause it and discuss some of those most incorrect cards as well. So at the time we have here, what I'd like to do is be able to is take a look at some tips on making a card sort again, and some things about the font size and whatnot. So here's what we need to do. I'm going to get out of this and go back to Desmos here. Again, the first place we would go back to is teacher.desmos.com. And again, you would need to be logged in with a free account in the top right to know what you need to do. I'm starting at the home screen here. For those of you who know a little more, have Desmos experience, you may remember that to do card sorts before, you had to go into your preferences and turn on the card sort ability. That's not true any longer. Card sorts is now available for everyone, so you no longer have to worry about kind of turning it on in your preferences. But let's take a look. So this is the main teacher.desmos.com page, and if I want to create a card sort, here is what I would do. On the left side, under your activities, the second link here is called custom. These are things that we are customizing, we're making our own or editing, and everything we've ever made or customized belongs here. When you hit custom, in the top right, it says new polygraph and new activity, and this is what we can create. The card sorts are considered part of their regular activities, so I would click new activity in the top right. So today we're going to do a very simple card sort on true, false, math. So different things with true, false math. Very simple here, but I have a title here, and I'm going to start building. So what you're seeing here, this is new for you, this is the behind-the-scenes Desmos Activity Builder that allows you to create many, many activities, but we're going to focus on getting a card sort going today. And if you notice, none of these up top say card sort. That's because it is under the far right button, the More button. There's a few choices here, and one of these, the second one, says card sort. And so I'm going to start with the card sort option here. So so here's my card sort, and so my directions can be typed at the top. I'm just going to keep it very simple for now. You can type whatever we need at the top. But then we need to make some cards here, and we have 3 choices of cards: a math or text card, an image card, or a graph card. If I want to make, obviously, I need a card that says true and false, so I'm clicking 2 of the math or text cards, and I'm just going to write 1 card to be true and 1 card to be false, and I have those cards right there. Maybe, and I'm going to show you some options here. I'm going to set up something very simple and show you how to more customize it here. But with a math or text card, the F of X button here is for the math type. If I wanted to do something simple, the math type allows me to do nice things like the fractions. Here's 1/3 plus 2/3 equals, oh, let's say a student 3/5. All right, definitely false, but we have that card. I can do another card real quick, maybe just some text. Diagonals of a rhombus are congruent. All right. And so I can make some cards here. And these are our text or math cards. And at the top right is preview. So if I want to see what this looks like, I can hit preview here. And here's what I see. I have my cards, just like I might think. The size of the card is based on how much text you have. But the person said earlier is right. Like right now, I don't have color on these. I don't have different font sizes. Right now, you're a little limited in Desmos to be able to do that within this. In fact, if you notice, there is no font choices. There is no color choices here yet, hopefully maybe someday. But right now, we don't have those options for too much inside here. But that's where we can do other things. And that's where these image cards come in. Image cards allow us to drag and drop or upload an image here of something we'd like to have that has a better font size, that has color, that has a little more graphics, all those pictures that we saw. And so let's do that. And here's a tip to do that. There's many ways. Basically, usually it needs to be a JPEG or, is it a PNG? Let's take a look, we'll find out. So here's one way to do this. Earlier, I made a PowerPoint, and you can use PowerPoint or a Keynote or Google Slides, and think of each of these as cards. And so one way to do this is, like, I went here earlier and just used my PowerPoint where I have a lot more capability to do font size and colors and backgrounds. And and as far as the different size fractions, I just use the equation editor on my computer to type in that same fraction equation and put it in there. Like Annie said, she said she dragged and dropped, or she did little screenshots from her online curriculum to put it in. Exactly, this is where you could, if you want to use a PowerPoint or Keynote type thing for that, it works great. So take a little screenshot, be able to put it in here, and we can use it. One thing people say is, I've seen Desmos cards that have the Desmos table in it, but I don't see how to do that with the Desmos screen. And you're right. Actually, people who have made the Desmos table have did what Annie did. They went to Desmos and they made their table and they did a little screen capture and then brought it into a PowerPoint slide or just saved it as a JPEG and had it here. Now, in a PowerPoint, key thing here is these are PowerPoint slides, not JPEGs. And so with Keynote or PowerPoint, one nice thing is under the File menu on the top, you can save as or save as pictures. It may depend on just what version you're using, but there's always this option. I'm going to hit Save as Pictures and just going to save this on my desktop for now in the JPEG format. And on my screen, it says each slide has been saved in a file over there on my side. Great. So I did that. And so going back here, I'm going to now, on my desktop, it saved this as JPEGs. And so here's what I can do now, is I can take those and just drag them right onto these cards. Looks like I need 4 more image cards. I'm going to make 4 more image cards. And I can just drag those on top. And if you can't drag, you can also, I need 1 more image card. You can also click it and get a little finder window to find it and upload it that way. But here are the cards that are now all put inside here. So now, when I go to the preview button at the top, we see now again I have some cards here that just I have a little more color for the true and false. Where this other fraction card was a little small, I now have much bigger, fractions that are a little more friendly that I can still click on and use here to go through. So we kind of just see that's one way of making some customized cards. So I don't need the true and false anymore. I don't need the original fraction equation. And so now I'm left with these for my card sort. A next thing here to do would be to make an answer key. Again, not every card sort has to have an answer key, but this one would. So if I click the answer key button, it basically asks me to make the groups that are going to be the correct groupings. So it looks like that would be false. I believe this data is linear. I believe these two triangles are congruent by side angle side, and diagonals of a rhombus are congruent. Well, that's a tricky one because I guess that's sometimes. So, but on its face, it is a false statement because it's not always true. So move it over there. So this has set. Our answer key, and I can hit done, and that's now set right there. So the next thing to do then is for our class is to think, is this the only screen I want? This may be enough. You know, one screen card sort can be great. Like I said, it could be an opener to a class, a closer in the middle, but you also have an option of adding screens over here. You know, if I wanted to add a screen where they were going to have to kind of justify an answer or to think about something, you know, there's different types of choices up here about, for example, here I could, in this note box, I could type in a question about, you know, explain, you know, your reasoning as we go forward, and students can down below be able to type in their answer. This is where, as we saw before as well, you know, if you wanted to bring in a picture of a sample card and have students talk about if it was matched correctly. And for the scope of what we're doing today, I'm not going to go into that because we have 4 minutes left. I just want to show this is where you just add screens here and kind of play around a bit to do that. To close this off, we hit the next button on the top, and if we want, we can put in a little description of what this is. It says make my activity public. That only means that you can share it with other people. There's going to be a link to it if you want, and I could put an image there if I want, but I hit publish. And this card sort then is now in my custom Desmos category over here. So on the left side, it's at the custom part over there, and here it is on the top. So when I click it, we see this. Again, we have the preview button to take a look at what this is going to look like for students. We also then can just create a class code. So at this point, I could create a class code and give it to my students and be able to collect all their information and use that information there. If I have 3 classes, don't forget, it's fine to create, you know, the code on the spot or to create 3 class codes. So if you want to keep your students separate, totally fine. We can go through like that. The last thing I wanted to say is I wanted to go back. Someone asked the other day, which is good. If you notice when I did the PowerPoint slides, all of these end up being the same size. Well, the card size in Desmos will align to whatever size JPEG you put in. So again, if you know how to do this, you can take a JPEG image, like I'm going to open up my true false one here, like this here, for example, and this depends on your computer, but I have mine open in the preview on my computer. There's a toolbox in the top of my preview. If I hit that toolbox, I get options. One of the options is a rectangular selection. I could grab around, for example, my false box and hit crop. I know this is kind of fast, but just so you get an idea, this is just how you would do this. And now I would save this. And now if I actually, you know, entered this card into Desmos, it would be a smaller card and wouldn't have the white around it. So little previews like that. But I know we're at the end here. So Annie, as we're wrapping up, I don't know if any other questions came in during that we want to close with, but that is kind of the, that's basically the end of our time. So.
Well, there was just one question, and I've heard this one before, so I thought it was worth asking.
Yeah.
I don't think there's, I think the answer is no, but I didn't know if you knew of anything coming of any type of audio features for students that might need directions or something read aloud to them.
Good questions. Not that I have heard at this point.
Yeah.
That's
that
a good
one
question.
comes up a lot, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can upload video, you know, so it depends what, as far as if you wanted to have a first screen that you gave student directions, you can record your audio in a video, and then in the Desmos Activity Builder, be able to insert a media screen and upload your video. And so if you wanted to explain something to students, but as far as reading the text on a specific screen, not at this time.
Yeah. But that's an interesting idea of having a video, like, because the person was thinking about like people that are, you know, emerging bilingual students or primary students, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge with us. Are you willing to share your presentation?
Oh, definitely.
Okay,
Yeah.
so if you want to send that to me, and then I can, that was the other question that came up was if they could see your slides, and so then I can share that in the follow-up email that will come in one day.
Definitely.
Perfect. And all of the other resources that you shared, I will also include in that follow-up email. Like I mentioned, any Illinois teachers that want PD credit, that will come in the follow-up email. And when we conclude this webinar, there'll be a short survey that we really appreciate if you take, because it gives us good feedback for planning our webinars for next year. So I think that's the end of our time. I appreciate everyone joining us, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Good luck at the end of your school year.
Thank you.